Welcome to One Sharp Sword, cutting through to what matters most. I'm your host, Dr. P, Dr. Wayne Pernell, the exponential success coach. Today, I have the honor and pleasure of welcoming a man who's he's literally run the miles. It's someone who works in leadership development. He started in human resources in the Silicon Valley, and he's done endurance running. What he brings to institutions and organizations is literally epic. And without saying more, I will welcome Bryan Gillette. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Dr. P, it is a pleasure to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. It turns out, I think one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the show is you and I do such similar things. And it's a way of saying that the world, that it's like, there's an abundance out there. It's not like, oh, we do similar things and I can't have you on the show. We do similar things, and it's a way of modeling, I think, for the audience that you can build and lift people in your arena, knowing that either you're going to create a collaboration of some sort, or you're going to come at things from a different direction, getting to the same place, and that's great because people get to choose. Like, there's a variety for everybody. I also found out that you and I are both Aggies. You got your degree at Davis. So talk a little bit about what got you into leadership development. You came through human resources. I have a HR background as well, and organization development background as well. So I want to talk about like your journey. Right?
Yeah.
The journey of Bryan Gillette. So
well, it's a pleasure to have the conversation, and kind of going back to what you started talking about is the collaborate is there's enough business for both of us, for all of us to be out doing things, and why I like being on shows like you or connecting with people like you is I can learn. And I can learn it's like how you do something, how you handle a problem, how you come at a situation. And so that's good. It's helpful for me. And I think I can do the same of others. And if both of us are learning, we raise up the whole industry, and it can make both of us look better. So I appreciate that.
I want to just jump in real quick. This is like, for the audience, what you're going to see potentially, and we haven't done this yet, we might. The idea of a mastermind is, according to Napoleon Hill, right, from Think and Grow Rich, the idea there is the sharing of ideas to be able to create even greater ideas.
Yeah.
And the way I define it is, if I had $1 and Bryan had $1 and we traded dollars, we'd each still have $1. And yet, if I have an idea and he has an idea and we trade ideas, then we have not just two ideas that we've shared, but those two ideas spark 3, 30, 40, 100 ideas. So that is the idea of collaboration, of sharing and building, is the mastermind that may just happen right here on the show.
Well, now we have to kind of head towards that direction, huh? And I know we'll talk about EPIC as we get into it, and the C of EPIC stands for collaborate, and we can get into that in a little bit. But kind of my background, so I hadn't realized you were an Aggie, so it's good to be a fellow Aggie. I got my undergraduate degree there in organizational behavior and in communication. So that was many years ago, and I remember. Oh, probably about 10 years ago, my wife and I went up to the campus. We were driving up through Sacramento because I'm in the Bay Area, and we were driving up. Actually, I think we were heading up to Tahoe, and we wanted to stop by the campus because we hadn't been on the campus for a long time. And we're walking around the campus, and I said to my wife, I said, "What are all these kids doing on the campus?" and I realized they were the students. we have just gotten older, and so it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I've got to shift my perspective, and now I have a high schooler that's starting to look at colleges. So time has gone by quickly.
It's true. And the town has changed incredibly.
Yes. Yeah. So I actually, I started coming out of college, I went and worked for a financial services company and went through, at the time, there were a lot of companies that had management training programs. And this was a phenomenal program. I started connecting up with people in the leadership development and the training and development space, and really enjoyed working with them and partnering with them. And that's kind of how I got into the leadership development space, and training and development. And I remember having a conversation with one of my early mentors, because I was thinking about getting my master's, and I said to him, I'm thinking about getting my master's. Should I get my MBA, or should I go in and get like a master's in organizational development? And he steered me towards the MBA. He goes, if you're going to be going into leadership development, he goes, get your MBA, because then you'll have a good perspective of what a business leader has to deal with. And so I'm not an expert in finance or in marketing, but at least I understand some of the issues. And so I went and got my MBA, and then started to kind of grow in the leadership development space. Ran a couple of leadership development functions, and I had another really good mentor and boss who I still stay in touch with to this day. And he got me involved in different aspects of human resources. So I went from the leadership development space, kind of broadened my human resources space, and then eventually went on and was vice president for in a technology company in HR. And then probably about 11 years ago, I decided, all right, I want to go out on my own. I want that flexibility, and started up my own leadership development consulting practice. And I really focus in two areas. One is kind of one-on-one coaching with leaders. And then the other one is facilitating kind of team building or executive retreats, kind of pulling people together and trying to get them aligned. And that's, if I can get people aligned around things, that will make their life a whole lot better.
That's so great. It's exactly, that's what it's about, is getting very clear on what matters. That's part of cutting through to what matters most. It's part of what this is about. Why I named the show that is, often people aren't clear about what matters. Often leaders aren't clear about being able to make that statement. And if they're not clear about what matters to them, either personally and or for the company, they aren't going to get people lining up behind them going, oh, I'm with you. Charisma goes so far. I'm with you no matter what you say. I believe in you. That only goes so far. I believe in the cause. I believe in where we're headed. I believe in wanting to build this vision that you just talked about. Mm-hmm. That's a very different statement. That's what leadership development is. So getting alignment is huge.
I'm not sure what you see, and love to kind of hear about what you see, but I often get a leader or an HR exec will call me up and says, hey, Bryan, we have this communication issue between, manager A and employee B. And I have my undergraduate degree in communications, and I don't know what that means when I hear it. When somebody says we have a communication issue, because it is so broad.
Yeah.
But most of the time, what it comes out to be is we have unclear expectations. We have an alignment issue where, the manager hasn't been clear to the employee about what he or she expects, what the vision is. You talked about vision. And so I see most of the time, it's like, if you can get those two people aligned around expectations, around the direction, you've solved a big part of the problem. I'd be interested to hear if, kind of what you see as well.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. The flow of the show changes depending on who's on, and I appreciate this conversation.
Yeah.
So exponential success has 3 V's, right? When I talk about exponential success, It's values, it's vision, and it's vitality. It's what energy you bring to it. Now, I got my start. My background is clinical psych, and I actually got my start doing leadership development when a guy called me after I had been doing some couples work with him and his wife, and he called me and he said, "That thing you did with me and my wife." I'm like, "That thing I did with you and my wife."
Then you're worried. What thing
right?
did I
Yeah,
do?
what thing? Right. So exactly. I'm like, he goes, "I want to thank you." I'm like, "You're welcome." He goes, "But that's not what I'm calling about. I need you to do that thing you did with me and my wife. Can you do it with me and my vice president?" And that shifted everything for me because, in clinical psych, you're trained to stay in the box, do it in your office, stay in the frame. And I'm like, it's communication.
Yeah.
Yes, I can help you. And I started going, actually, it was more like, sure, like, oh, I didn't know.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, but I believed in myself and I believed in the work and I believed in this guy that was really, I didn't know that he was really the president of a big organization in South San Francisco. And I didn't, because he was a dude and his wife, right? He was just, and so when he invited me to come in, it was a big shift in the way I did things, but not in necessarily in what I did, which was, let's define the values first. What do you believe in? And dear Vice President, what do you believe in? And are they similar or are they disparate? And how do you communicate when you disagree? And what are the working agreements? And so we establish values and we establish working agreements. Like, this is what I believe in. Well, how do you want to say it? Well, I want to say it this way. Well, I don't agree with all of that. Well, does that make the person wrong or just the things that he's saying? Like, you don't agree with all of that. And so we get working agreements on how to engage so that it becomes a discussion and not a matter of fight, which is, Bryan, when you were saying, a manager and his or her employee, it's like, usually it's that you're right that there's a lack of clarity around expectation. There's also a lack of clarity around working agreements.
Right.
Like, the person's not bad. My guess is the person is trying to do his or her job, but it's not coming out the way that you expected it. So let's talk about clarity of communication.
Yeah.
What I expected, and I have a process. What I expected was this. What I got was this. What I do expect is that. So the third step then is, or the fourth step, like clarification of expectation. Expectation, outcome is, here's what we got. Here's the expectation one more time. The fourth thing is, what support do you need to get to that expectation? How can I help you succeed? And that's the working process that I use. And I don't know how you go about it, but
it's very similar. And I love how you went from doing it with couples into doing it in the corporation. And
yeah.
And I'd done so much in the corporation, and I thought, if this works, between managers, why can't it work between a husband and a wife? And my wife and I do some of the same things. And it's funny because as I'm talking to teams or individuals, and I'll give them an exercise, we use things like DISC communication styles.
Sure.
I said, this works with your spouse as well. And I find my wife and we are better together when we're aligned on things. And so we, every year we sit down at the end of the year and we plan, what does next year look like? And most couples fight about, you're an expert in this, fight about money. Yeah. And so my wife and we will sit down and we will figure out what the budget is for the next year. And then we follow that. And I can't get mad if I see her spending things that I don't think should be spent on, but we're part of the budget. And it's all about that expectations. And I love how you kind of paint. It's the same stuff at home is what we see at work. They're just a little bit different audiences.
It's exactly right. I mean, I'm a fan of saying, look, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so you show up with your values, and you've got to be very clear on what those values are. And those values help you set the vision. Well, the vision at home is going to be different than the vision at work. That said, the vision at home, most people will, and the vision for yourself personally as an individual, most people plan their vacations with so much specificity. They plan their vacations more than they plan the next year or two or three of their own lives. And so, the fact that you and your wife have a sit down, that's like, let's agree. This is what I want. This year is the new car. This year is not the car, but the roof. This year is this year is the travel. You've got, kids that are
they're in high school. Yeah.
Getting ready for college, which means this year is the year for trips to visit, right? So you look at, what does this year hold? And I think, to translate that to the business, it's, what does this year hold? How do we pull people together to keep them on track? When I work with couples and when I work with individuals, I usually recommend that every 3 months they take a longer weekend. It's on the calendar. Because what happens, and this is true for everybody, whether it's at home or at work, when you create a novel experience, you grow together and you bond. Right. So,
well, I mean, to that point is, I often work with groups to help them put together, a 1 or a 2 or a 3-day leadership retreat.
Perfect.
And I want to understand, okay, what are your goals? I like to understand what are your primary goals, for when you walk out of here. What do you want people to know, to do, whatever that is. Right. But then I also like to understand, what are those goals you may not talk about? It's like, okay, I want these 3 people to be able to communicate more effectively, and because they're not getting along. And we'll put together some exercises, but I'll often talk to the client and I'll say, you know what? Some of the most valuable time you can spend is outside this classroom when everybody's sitting around the bar. And make sure you build that in, because when I get to know you personally, and I get to know, oh man, Wayne went to UC Davis, and I get to know more about your kids, I see you more as a person. And it's harder for me to get mad at you, because now you're a person as opposed to this kind of, this title way off in a different department. And so I actually strongly encourage, it's like, build time in at the end of the day for time at the bar, just where people can sit and get to know each other.
Spoken like a true HR VP. Go to the bar with your teammates.
That's right.
The truth is, when you humanize someone, it is very difficult to then characterize them or character assassinate them. That they're a person. They have
needs. And I was teaching a class, finishing up a leadership class at a good sized technology company in the Silicon Valley yesterday. And I had about a dozen leaders, managers and directors in the room. And one of them was talking about, he goes, one of the values of the class is I get to meet people from other functions. And so you had people from R&D and you had people from marketing. And sometimes those two worlds, do not go together.
Yeah.
And now you can get that marketing person talking to the R&D to understand, why did you build it that way? And then the R&D person can get to understand, okay, what's the client really wanting? And they get to know each other. So 3, 6, 9 months down the road, when there's an issue, hey, I remember meeting Wayne in that class. I'm going to call him up. Yeah, because it as you talk about, it humanizes the situation, and we're much better at that. That's why I think these last couple of years were hard, because we're so used to doing everything over Zoom. It's harder to make that personal connection, and so it's good that we're, I think, out of it for the most part.
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, If you think back 3-4 years, it was put down the technology and go out and meet people. Pandemic hit, and it was, you can't go out, so you better pick up the technology so you can connect with people. And now we're out of the pandemic, and it's like, well, are we meeting on Zoom, or are we going to meet in person? And you've got this hybrid mix, and leaders need to recognize that there is a bias for those in the office. And it is really important that those that are remote or choose to be remote, or may just be so far away that by necessity they're remote, that they feel disconnected. And it's a really important, it's got to be very deliberate to connect.
Well, and it's one of the big challenges that so many of the presidents of these companies are having. It's like,
exactly.
A lot of the employees are saying, I like working from home. I want that flexibility. I don't have to worry about, we're both in the Bay Area, and, and so an hour commute is not abnormal. But the collaboration has gone down. I was down at Google a couple of weeks ago talking to a friend, and I asked him, I said, what do you notice different now? Because he comes into the office 5 days a week, but a lot of people come in a couple of days a week. And he says the collaboration is much higher. That serendipitous trip by the water cooler where it's like, I can just start talking to you about something that doesn't happen on Zoom.
No, it's true.
So it is that balance. And it's the same thing with the client I was at yesterday, that I was asking them, and they have to be in the office 3 days a week. And I said, do you notice a difference? He says, yes, there's more conversations. There's more collaboration now that we're back in the office.
It matters. And so if someone is remote, if you're hybrid, you've got to create the incidental, right? It's got to be created that way.
You are bigger than the life you are leading. It really is time to attend to that thing you've wanted to do or have, but you've been putting off. It's time to step into that dream you've parked for someday. It's time to claim true well-being, both personally and professionally, without giving up the success that got you here. It's time to check out Dr. Pernell's signature small group retreat, the Exponential Success Summit. Explore exponentialsuccesssummit.com. Seats are extremely limited, as this is a very special small group event. www.exponentialsuccesssummit.com.
You said something else, which is kind of interesting. The, pulling people together. I highly recommend cross-functional team meetings. And in my years of OD, of organization development, I would deliberately create those. So you pull two representatives from teams from different departments and divisions. You pull them into a meeting. And one of the strongest things I did was to do a modified SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, about each department by the other people in the room. Mm. And they were people found out, like, they'd get the thing and they'd read it and it'd be like, that's not what I do at all. So you think that that's a weakness of mine, but like, that's not even what I do. So
now, how would you manage the defensiveness? Because there's a tendency where it's like, oh, wait a minute, that's not me, as you're talking about. How do you did you see that a lot?
So it's a great question. I start with a premise, and I've done a couple of TEDx. The recent one, it's a year old now. I'm gonna brag. It has almost 2 million views, 1.8 million views on it. It's called "How a Parallax Perspective Disrupts Perceptual Bias," and that is a fancy way of saying we all have biases. We all have filters on, and we need to be deliberate about looking at things differently than we're used to. And And so my premise is that we need make but one assumption in the world, and that is I am not seeing the big picture. That's the assumption. I don't
love
have
that.
I don't have all the information about the context or the situation. I don't have all the information about the other person, and I may have some blind spots and therefore not all the information about myself. And that means that we need to come to each situation with curiosity. So when I talk about starting with working agreements and values, I will open every session with, what are the values? And what are the working agreements? Well, can we agree to stay curious? And I've gone all the way to the point of bringing a Curious George monkey and actually sitting the little stuffed guy on the table in the boardroom. And somebody will go, what's with the monkey? And I'm like, well, and someone else will go, that's not a monkey, that's George. And I'll go, right. And someone else will go, it's not George, it's Curious George. And I'm like, that's right. And so it's a great question. What's with the monkey? You start with a question instead of what a stupid monkey. You say, what's with the monkey? You start with a question. You stay in curiosity. You can't be in judgment. That's where we're starting.
Yeah.
And it's like, set the context.
I love that. For the book that I wrote, I interviewed 100 executives. And one of the things that a lot of them talked about is curiosity.
Yeah.
Is they have they have such curiosity to figure out, okay, what could we do? What's possible? And then they start to explore down that avenue. And I think of my older son, he is so curious, and I love to see that brain going. And it's fun to be around curious people. It can be tiresome as well, because they're always the brain's always moving around. So I love that thought about curiosity.
And I love that you framed it and that you heard it from your execs as, what could we do?
Yeah.
Meaning that there's a positive outcome that they're not seeing yet, which is fantastic.
Well, and what I think, and I hope this will raise it even more, because I always like to look at what's the silver lining out of a bad situation. And I remember, early on in the pandemic, and I had two kids that were home, and so it was not the greatest thing. But I always like to see, okay, what is the silver lining in all this? And people were complaining, oh, our English scores are going to go down, our math scores are going to go down. And I thought, yeah, that could happen. But what could also happen is it gets people to deal with change as well. So, I mean, how do you deal with change? How do you deal with adversity? So I thought that was a bigger skill. But if you kind of think back and to kind of like 3 years ago to today, maybe about 3 years and a month from today, is there were so many things that we said were impossible. And had you and I gone to any of our clients and suggested that they have everybody work from home, and then even gone like one step even crazier further, say, why don't you try that this week? I don't know about your clients, Wayne, but most of mine would have said, hey, Bryan, you're nuts.
Yep.
And as a former head of HR, had I gone to my CEO and said, I think we ought to have everybody work from home, and let's start that this week, he would have said, well, why don't we just start with you?
Yeah, exactly.
and don't worry about coming back in. Don't worry about anything. Don't worry about work. And we're not going to pay you. And so many things like that, we would have said were impossible. And you look back, it's like, we did it. I mean, a friend of mine is, and I talk about this in a keynote that I do. A friend of mine is a CBS News reporter in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she was doing her newscast from home.
Oh, yeah.
So all these things, and I like to get people think back 3 years ago, and what did you say was impossible? And what did you do? And it's that curious mind that kind of doesn't really recognize impossible. And one of the quotes that I love, it's, once you stop thinking something is impossible, when you stop thinking something is impossible, you start thinking that it's possible.
Mm.
And so I'm hopeful, now that we're out of this crazy, last couple of years, that when somebody says, oh, that's impossible, I'm hopeful that it's like, okay, is it?
Yeah.
And that's really what got me to write the book. And it's I've done some, been fortunate to do some big ultra distance endurance events, and one of them was run 200 miles around Lake Tahoe. And you've been from California, Lake Tahoe and what that's like. And it's all on dirt trail. It's, you're out in the middle of nowhere. You're at elevation, sometimes almost up to 10,000 feet. And I had a number of people say, oh, I could never do that. And even something, my wife and I took our kids out of school for a year and we traveled around the world. And as we were getting ready to go on the trip, some friends held a going away party for us. And a couple of them came up and said, I could never do that. And that thought of I can't do something just resonated with me. And so that's why why I went out, and it's like, I want to interview. I know what I've done in order to do some things that people say are impossible. I want to learn from, these other executives and ultra distance athletes. What did you do to do what so many people said, oh yeah, I could never do that? And what is that mindset? And so that's what was just fascinating. Curiosity was a big thing that came out over and over.
I love all of this. This is, oh, I could never do that. And it's like, well, that doesn't mean I'm not going to, right? Just because you're putting limits on you.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that is, well, what if you could? What if you could?
Right. Or maybe you can't do that today.
Today, yes.
But what could you do today or tomorrow to move you closer?
That's awesome. I used to teach martial arts. And so, so my kids, the kids in the class, oh, I can't do that. It's like, yet.
Right.
You can't do it yet.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
And that you never have doesn't mean you can't.
Right.
That it's like, it doesn't, right? And so sometimes when people go, oh, I could never do that, it means I admire you for doing that, which is a very different statement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, why not? It's easy enough. Like you could.
And we come up with all of these excuses of why, like, oh, I've never done it before. And when I hear that excuse, I think everything in life that you have done at one point you have never done before.
Exactly.
I mean, everything. And I've posed this to people. I said, can you give me an example where that statement is not true? And it's like everything in life, or I'm too old, and I often I'll use my keynote as an opportunity. I'll use kind of that 200-mile run as the backdrop of the talk. And so people will talk about marathons. It's like, oh, I'm too old to run a marathon. And I'll ask him, I said, how old the oldest person to run a marathon was? And he was 100 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking around the room and I say, I don't see anybody in this room that's 100 years old. At least it doesn't look like it. So it's like, we put these excuses in our head, and you've got the psychology background to know so much more about that.
Well, I look at some of the speakers that have been out there, some of the people that you do keynotes, I do keynotes, and it's like, there are people in their 80s that are still serving. They're serving greatly. They are inspiring. They're imparting wisdom. And it's like, I got time then. Like,
right.
There's still time.
Yeah.
That's one of the things is what's in you. What have you not attempted before? And that's the inspiration as either an individual or as a company. What have you been dreaming about, thinking about, but you haven't done yet?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, so many of the companies, be interested if this is your experience. So many of the companies I work with, and they say, we want to put our strategic plan together. And I said, okay, how far do you want to look out? We want to look out next year, which, that's not really strategic, but all right, I'll work with you. And it's like, maybe we're so used to thinking 1 or 2 or 3 years out. And how are we thinking 10 or 20 or 30 years out? I worked with one company and they wanted to look 30 years out.
That's awesome.
And I feel fairly confident that what was set, it's not going to get exactly that. But at least they set an idea of where they want to go in 30 years, because big change often doesn't occur in 1 or 2 or 3 years.
Right.
It takes 30 years to have that vision of where you want to go. And one of the questions I'll often start out with groups is, think about when you're 80. If I'm looking at an individual basis, and think about when you're 80, what are the things that you want to have accomplished or have done? And then think about, will you regret not trying that? And it's a question my wife and I will often ask, and I ask individuals to do it all the time. It's like, if we're thinking about doing something big, like, okay, when we're 80, will we regret not doing it?
Yeah. No, I approach from a slightly different angle.
Yeah, tell me more.
And that's tell you more. It is. See, I pair regret with fear.
Okay.
And so I actually look for more an aspirational place. And it's like, well, what do I want? Not what will I regret, but what do I really want? Like, the past is behind us. There's some things that I'm no longer teaching martial arts. I'm no longer, in my past, I've run 3 half marathons. My knees probably won't let me run another one. I could walk one really slowly. I could still do one if I wanted. I'm going to do something different. So what is that different? What do I want to do next? And I think that when you work with companies, it's great to have a 20-year strategic vision with a 3-year strategic plan, especially if you're looking at tech, because by the time you've hit that 3-year mark, everything's changed. Everything's done. Like a year and a half used to be a long cycle. Right. And now everything's changing so fast. So to have a 3-year plan is pretty good.
Yes, I agree.
And I do that with individuals in small groups where I gather people, and it's like, let's really focus on what you want to have in your life, and therefore, who do you need to become? And I think that that's part of the strategy when you work with organizations as well, right?
Yeah, no, that's it. And I like that 3-year plan. And that long-term vision. I worked for one company, and we were a software company, and we helped to manage the document flow of a lot of pharmaceutical procedures. So if you were a drug company looking to take your drug to market, there's so many steps and hoops you have to go through to get FDA approval. And our software managed that process and kept track of changes to things, of documents. And the founder of the company, he goes, I want us to cure cancer. And he saw curing cancer, and we had no doctors on staff. We dealt with no medicine, but the way he looked at it is, we were helping drug companies get to market faster, which was going to help cure cancer. One of the benefits was it was going to help get drugs to cure cancer faster. But it was that vision of, instead of just looking at us that we're a document management company, we were trying to cure cancer.
That's amazing.
And so how do you paint that vision? And then, okay, what do we have to do in the next 3 years? What do we have to do in the next 1 year? What do we have to do in the next 1 quarter? And break things down.
In terms of vision, it's one thing when you hire team members to work for a document company. It's another thing to hire team members and say, this is our vision.
Yeah.
We're not just processing documents. These documents matter. And again, this is like, how do you as a leader communicate this process? You're working on this document. This document could be responsible for how we break through something that's going to be literally earth-shattering. Like,
Right.
it will affect the world.
And it gives people a bigger purpose.
That's the whole point.
I'm working with one client, and we were talking about purpose. And despite what seems to be going on in the economy, good people are still getting hired, and good people can easily leave your company. And so you have to give them a reason to stay at your company. And so I was talking to this one president, and I was saying, kind of, what is your employee proposition, or why does this organization exist? And he said, well, if you ask the founders, they'll say just to make money. And I think, is that going to get your employees excited? Yes, every company has to make money, but the generation coming up now is they want to have more purpose than maybe you and I wanted in our jobs at the time.
Interesting.
And so it's like, how do you give some purpose to people?
Yeah. From Gallup polls, meaningful work has always been in the top 2.
Right.
And acknowledgement has always been in the top 3. And so money pre-pandemic was around number 5.
Yes.
So post-pandemic, it is in the top 3. And now the top 3 are, tell me that what I'm doing matters somehow. Like, give me meaningful work.
Yes.
Tell me that what I'm doing just like makes a difference to somebody. Number 2 is, tell me that you see me doing it. Like, acknowledge that, like, yes, you've given me this great work. Acknowledge that you actually see me doing it. Not at the end of the week go, nice job, everybody. See ya.
Yeah.
But hey, I saw you do this thing for that customer. I saw you do this thing on this document. I saw you do this thing. So acknowledge the work. And the third is pay fairly, pay competitively. There were 2. I did a speech for the New York State Business Council, actually, and it was for HR. And I got everybody to lean in because I said there are 2 F words we need to be discussing. And when people are like, oh, F words, like, this is HR. And I'm like, the first one is flexibility, and the second one is freedom. And those are the key F words. Those are the key things that people want right now. Yeah. The pandemic taught us what our values were, and we need to be acknowledging that for our team members.
Yeah. And we all have different values. And I think that's important for a company to figure out, what do they value, lean into that, hire people that have similar values.
Yes.
And be clear about it. And I'll tell employees the same thing. Or, I teach up at the university, and I'll talk to people. It's like, figure out what's important to you, and then look for companies that share that. And just because they don't share that value doesn't mean they're a bad company. It just means they're not right for you. And get alignment now, because you're going to stay there. You're going to be more fulfilled there. You're going to be a better employee there. Everything's going to work much better.
This is huge, because what you just defined was alignment. And a lot of times people like us, we've been in the biz a while, a few decades, and it's easy to go, well, let's talk alignment. Let's talk about collaboration. Let's talk about the vision thing. And it's like, no, let's define it. Because when you get clear definition of values, when you get clear definition of personal values against the values, the stated values of an organization, and you say, I believe in those, now you've got alignment. And that is key. And I love that you brought it up. Let's talk about, we have looking at the clock, and so I want to make sure that we cover what we need to cover, and give you time to talk about. Let's talk about the Epic book. You've got a website to go to, but let's talk about Epic and what it stands for. EPIC is a great acronym. I love when I uncovered that in some of your work, and I'm like, That's perfect, Bryan. It's like really good, really good. So,
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you bringing that up and acknowledging that. I had been doing some big endurance events, and I was thinking, it's like, how do I do that? And I wanted to learn from I wanted to learn from a bunch of other people. And so I interviewed the 100 executives, ultra distance athletes and executives, because I think I see a lot of similarity between what high performers do either in sport or in work. And, these were CEOs of companies or CFOs, kind of the C level. And just ask them, it's like, how did they get to that? What do they do? And I came up with 5 behaviors, and that's what epic performance is. And the E is, how do you envision the big things in life? These people could see where they want to go long way out, and they could envision the future, both in their personal life, but also in work. The P is, once you know where you want to go, how do you put a plan in place in order to achieve that? The I is, how do you iterate to the plan? You don't start off running a marathon. You don't start off as the CEO of the company. You start off, running 2 miles. Or you start off, working in the call center, and then you iterate, you build your confidence up, and you work your way up into bigger and bigger things. The C is, how do you collaborate with other people? And we talked about that at the beginning of the show. It's we can learn from other people who've been successful, or learn from people who failed. And
yes,
I can't think of a lot of things that are so brand new that you can't learn from it, and you go from somebody else. And then lastly, how do you perform it? So there's that epic performance. You got to go out. You got to endure the difficult times. You got to, as I look at the EPIC, the envision, plan, iterate, collaborate, that gets you to the starting line of something big. The performance gets you to the finish line. And you have to endure the difficult times. You have to endure when it starts to rain, or your feet start to hurt, or you can't make payroll. You have to endure that. And what are the things that you can do? So that's kind of how epic performance came to be. And each of the 5, I kind of walk through each of the 5 pillars and how you can just get a little bit better. It's fairly practical.
I love it.
Of what you can do just to figure out, okay, I'm really good at iterating. Maybe I need to work on my envisioning, and what can I do?
It's interesting to land on iterate for a second. A lot of people believe in perfectionism. And it's like, well, I can't put it out because it's not perfect.
Right.
And it's like, well, you can't perfect it until it's out.
Yeah.
Right. So that's part of the iteration process. Is it's out. Let me refine it. Let me refine again. Let me refine again. And then let me collaborate. And it's not necessarily sequential, right? That you're collaborating in order to get the next iteration.
Well, you got to envision first, and you got to perform last. Sure. Everything else can be done, throughout the time. And it's funny you talk about perfection. Is very few things have to be perfect. And I'm working with an executive right now, and I've been coaching her for about 3-4 months. Actually, I think I'm going on 5 months with her right now. And she has these perfectionist tendencies. And I asked her, I said, do you think you can be perfect? And she said, no, I can't. I said, well, then it sounds like you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
We don't need to be perfect. And perfection, there's a big cost to go from 98% right to go to 100% right. And sometimes that's not worth it. You look at airlines.
Yeah.
An airplane has redundancy. That's why it has 4 engines. That's why it has all those wheels, because if one engine goes out, those engines aren't perfect. The cost to get them to be perfect would be exorbitant, and we couldn't afford to fly. So they put 4 engines on it. And if one goes out, then the other 3 will work. But the cost of perfection is often not worth it.
That was perfect timing. As you said that, my one of my lights went out. So,
Right.
and I don't know if you saw that.
I did see a little bit of a
Like it was
flicker.
a flash, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have lights. They are rechargeable lights, and you're talking about redundancy. It's like, oh, okay. Well, that went out. Let me pull this one and put it right there. So
Yeah, we don't need perfect most of the time. Yeah, as my wife said to me, I think we were doing something, and she says, "Good enough is good enough."
so right. So for me, the idea is that we are perfect. We are perfectly flawed. And it's the flaws, it is the flaws that make us perfect. Because otherwise, that's the uniqueness. Otherwise, everybody would be identical, doing the exact same thing. And it's like perfect according to whom?
That sounds boring, huh?
Right.
And figure out, where do you have to be great at, and where do you have to be, can you just be good at?
Yeah.
Because you can't be great at everything. So
that's right. You gather people who are great. That's
right.
part of gathering the right team. That's
right.
The collaboration. That's the C in EPIC.
That's exactly what it is. It's like, I am great at a couple of things, but I am not great at a bunch of things. And so when I need those things done, I'm going to go find somebody that's great at it.
Yeah, the term is zone of genius. What is your particular zone of genius?
I love that.
And allow yourself that, right? Live in your zone of genius and gather people around you who have their zone of genius. And now you have a collaborative team of supporters not towards you, but towards this end goal, which is awesome. So yeah,
I love it.
Really good.
I love it.
Bryan, this is awesome. You and I will find a time to do lunch together, because we're like 40 minutes from each other, if that.
I would love it.
So here's a question, and and I've just invited you to lunch on a show, so that's awesome. Here's a question: is what did we not cover? Because I want to make sure that you got what you needed out of being here. And epicperformances.com is the website that will show up in the show notes. That's how people can contact you. It's Bryan Gillette. It's Bryan with a Y.
Yeah.
What were you hoping I would ask?
I loved this conversation, and I enjoyed the back and forth. So I appreciate it. I learned a few things, which is always makes it worth my time as well. And I think I would add nothing else on. I appreciate you kind of pointing people to epicperformances.com, and connect up with me on LinkedIn or send me a note. I always like to hear what big ideas people are working on. So it's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. That's awesome. Your book is over your shoulder on your desk back there. That's awesome. Epic is that's right
there.
That's right over your left shoulder. It's Epic, and is there a subtitle?
Epic Performance: Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak.
There you go. Epic Performance.
And it's on Amazon.
On Amazon, wherever books are.
Wherever books are, you can send me a note, and I'll figure out how to get you a copy.
That's awesome. All right. Bryan Gillette, Epic Performances. Thank you so much for being here. Truly.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Wayne.
Okay. All right. This is One Sharp Sword, cutting through to what matters most. My guest today was Bryan Gillette. And what a fun conversation. I am Dr. P, Dr. Wayne Pernell, the Exponential Success Coach, and we'll see you again here next time. Thanks for tuning in.